Stop! You haven't subscribed to the channel yet? Subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now, let's go. The unwelcome guest. I come from a humble, hard-working family. My wife, Emily, and I have always been content with our simple life in a small town in Ohio. I'm 34, she's 30, and together we have a beautiful son named Jack. We don't own fancy cars or live in lavish homes, but we have each other, and that's always been enough. Emily and I both work long hours and rarely have time to relax, but we make it work. Our modest house is filled with love and laughter, or at least it was until her mother, Linda, started interfering in our lives. Linda is a force to be reckoned with. Divorced and bitter, she's never shied away from sharing her unsolicited opinions about how we should live our lives. You two need to find better jobs, she'd say during her unannounced visits. How do you expect to provide for Jack with these dead-end positions? Linda, we're doing just fine, I'd reply, forcing a smile. Fine isn't good enough, she'd retort, her eyes narrowing. Emily deserves more than fine. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day at work, Emily and I sat down for dinner when the doorbell rang. Surprise! Linda chimed as she let herself in, not waiting for an invitation. Mom, what are you doing here? Emily asked, a hint of exasperation in her voice. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by, Linda said, setting a store-bought pie on the counter. And I have some exciting news. Can't wait, I muttered under my breath. I've reconnected with an old friend, Richard, she announced. He's quite successful, and it turns out he's always had a thing for Emily. I nearly choked on my mashed potatoes. Excuse me? Mom, what are you talking about? Emily looked as baffled as I felt. Don't be so modest, dear. Richard owns several businesses, and he's single. He could provide you and Jack with everything you deserve. Linda, that's enough, I said firmly. She waved a dismissive hand. Oh, don't be so sensitive. I'm just looking out for my daughter. Mom, I'm happily married, Emily insisted. Linda shrugged. Well, the offer stands. We laughed it off at the time, but Linda was nothing if not persistent. Over the next few weeks, I noticed subtle changes. Emily started coming home with expensive items, a new smartphone, designer clothes, even a gold necklace. Wow, that's a nice dress, I commented one evening. Did we win the lottery? She laughed nervously. Just a little something I picked up. With what money? I pressed. I've been doing some freelance work on the side, she said, avoiding eye contact. Freelance? Since when? Since recently, she snapped. Why all the questions? Just curious, I said, raising my hands defensively, but curiosity gnawed at me. Something didn't add up. One afternoon, I came home early from work to find a sleek black Mercedes parked outside our house. My heart sank. I entered quietly and heard voices coming from the living room. Richard, you really shouldn't have. Emily giggled. Anything for you, a man's voice replied smoothly. I peered around the corner to see a well-dressed man handing her a wrapped box. Emily, what's going on here? I stepped into the room, trying to keep my voice steady. She jumped, her face flushing. Oh, you're home early. Yes, and apparently just in time for gift exchange hour. Richard extended his hand. You must be John. Pleasure to meet you. I ignored his hand. Can't say the same. Don't be rude, Linda scolded, appearing from the kitchen. Richard is our guest. Our guest? In my house. I felt my temper rising. John, please, Emily pleaded. Let's talk about this privately. Great idea, I agreed, gesturing toward the hallway. In our bedroom, I closed the door behind us. Who is this guy, Emily? He's just a friend, she insisted. A friend who gives you expensive gifts and hangs out in our house when I'm not home. You're overreacting. Am I? Your mother has been pushing this guy at you, and now he's here, cozying up to you and our son. Richard's been very generous. He's helping us out. Helping us out? We don't need his help. Maybe we do, she shot back. We could use the extra money. I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. At what cost, Emily? Our marriage? She looked away. You're being dramatic. I took a deep breath. Have you slept with him? Her silence was deafening. Emily? She met my gaze briefly before looking down. It was a mistake. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. A mistake. It just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. A few months. I nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. I see. I'm sorry, she said, tears welling up. I never wanted to hurt you. Well, you did a bang-up job of that, I replied bitterly. Back in the living room, I found Richard and Linda chatting amicably. You need to leave, I told Richard curtly. Now let's be reasonable, he began. Get out of my house, I said firmly. He raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, no need for hostility. As he left, Linda glared at me. You're making a big mistake, John. The only mistake I made was letting you meddle in our lives, I shot back. That night, I packed a bag. I'm staying at a friend's place for a while, I told Emily. Please don't go, she begged. We can work this out. I shook my head. I can't. Not after this. I filed for divorce the next week. Emily seemed shocked but didn't fight it much. Maybe she thought Richard would be her ticket to a better life. The months that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I missed my son terribly, but couldn't bear to be around Emily or her mother. Update. A year later, I ran into a mutual friend at the grocery store. Hey, John. Long time no see, Mike greeted me. Hey, Mike. How have you been? Good, good. Have you heard about Emily? I stiffened. No. What about her? Well, turns out Richard wasn't the knight in shining armor he pretended to be. They broke up a while back. Is that so? I tried to sound indifferent. Yeah, and Linda moved in with her. They're living together on the outskirts of town. I nodded slowly. Thanks for letting me know. As I walked out of the store, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt sorry for her. Later that day, I received a text from Emily. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time before finally typing back. There's nothing left to say. I hit send and took a deep breath. It was time to move on. Author's note. Sometimes, life throws curveballs we never see coming. Trust and loyalty are hard to come by, and when they're broken, the consequences can be devastating. But even in the darkest times, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. For me, it was the realization that I deserved better and that moving forward was the only option.